What's up, guys? Welcome to another major Young Guns podcast video. Today, we're going to be talking about the Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg offer sheet saga that lasted a full week. And there was a lot of transactions in between these offer sheets, mainly involving the Edmonton Oilers, who, this offseason have completely given their forward core a facelift. So, a week ago, Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg, who are RFAs, were offer sheeted by the St. Louis Blues. We knew that the Edmonton Oilers had to clear some cap space. There was mention that they wanted to trade Brett Kulak and Cody Ceci in order to free up some salary in order to match both players. And as the week was, progressing, we saw that the Edmonton Oilers were making some interesting moves, which made us think, will they only offer sheet one or none? And ultimately, they decided not to offer sheet any guys and match these offers. So that makes Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway both members of the St. Louis Blues, which um, honestly, I don't think we've ever seen two guys offer sheet from the same team actually not being matched and both joining an organization after being offer sheet. I think this is the first time in
Yeah,
NHL history, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah, it
So,
is the first.
so we'd like to hear your thoughts, guys, on this whole saga. Obviously, we're gonna break down, both players individually, but also the other trades that happened in between these offer sheets as we awaited for an answer.
Yeah, so I mean, first and foremost, it's something that doesn't happen very often in the NHL. You don't see offer sheets very much. The last one and the most recent one was Jesperi Kotkaniemi, and obviously Sebastian Aho, that were offer sheeted one another after the saga between the Habs and Carolina, and now Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg were offer sheeted. Now the interesting part is that the last three offer sheets have actually not been matched. Jesperi Kotkaniemi wasn't matched with when his offer sheet went with the Carolina Hurricanes, and he ended up joining the Carolina Hurricanes and leaving the Montreal Canadiens. And now Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg both leave the Edmonton Oilers to go to St. Louis. And what's interesting about this offer sheet is that it was an interesting move for St. Louis because they overpaid for Philip Broberg in the sense that this is a guy that's played 81 career NHL games, right? 2 goals, 11 assists, 13 points in those 81 NHL games total. Only played 10 games in the playoffs, had 3 points, but was really solid and a pillar for them during the Stanley Cup final, right? And then you have Dylan Holloway, who is another player that had a really good playoff run with the Oilers. I think played really well. Played all 25 games, 7 points, 5 goals, 9 points in 38 games for them. But again, it was one of those things that it's like you look at how much the money was for both those players, and you're like, okay, that's a decent amount of money. Like 4.5 million for Broberg and $2 million, or I believe it's $2.1 million for Dylan Holloway. Those are players that at this point in their career are not worth that money, right? You could argue that Broberg, apart from his playoff run, was maybe a $1.5-2 million defenseman at best, if you really wanted to look at it that way. And Dylan Holloway, I mean, was probably about that range as well, 1 million to about 2 million. And so the fact is that St. Louis overpaid for both of these guys, but it's because they really wanted them. And if you look at it from a different perspective, they only gave up a second and a third to do it. And that's kind of why this offer sheet was made. It wasn't necessarily anything to do with money, but more to do with the fact that if you were to call Edmonton in a normal circumstance and be like, hey, we're interested in Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway, you wouldn't be able to get them for a second and a third. It just wouldn't be possible. So they kind of found a different loophole around it. And I think it's smart. I think it was a smart decision from St. Louis to do it. I think they put Edmonton in an interesting situation, and ultimately Edmonton decided not to go and match the offers. And yeah, they made some other moves. I mean, they acquired Vasily Podkolzin for a 4th-round pick from the Vancouver Canucks, who's a younger player than Dylan Holloway, 10th overall pick as well. So could be a different addition for them. And then obviously they made the other trade of Cody Ceci and a third round pick to the Sharks in exchange for Ty Emberson. And Emerson's a depth defenseman, so they save money in that instance. They still pick up a defenseman. So I think for Edmonton, ultimately, it's not a huge loss for them. I think at the end of the day, they ended up, clearing some cap space, and they also gained, draft picks. In addition, they also made a trade today after the conclusion of the offers being matched. They traded Paul Fischer, who's a fifth round pick for them, a fifth round pick from the St. Louis Blues. He got traded to the Oilers along with a third round pick for future consideration. So the Oilers ended up stockpiling on some draft picks and some, assets here, and they can use that in the future to potentially make a bigger move if they ever need to. And they also have cap space that they can work with a little bit. So, at the end of the day, yeah, it's unfortunate for the Edmonton fans who like Broberg and Holloway and the potential that they had. But at the end of the day, I think this works out for both teams. But I like it. I like what St. Louis did. I think it was really smart. And it's something that we don't see very often. So it's always fun to see offer sheets like that.
So yeah, I'll say this about having offer sheets in the league and general managers having that possibility. Like we mentioned, last time was Jesperi Kotkaniemi, which is it goes to show that offer sheets are rare. It's a hostile contract proposal because the team maintaining the rights on the player maintains negotiating rights, but outside parties could interfere, and that's the situation we have with these offer sheets, and it's also the reason why I don't like the situation we have for Doug Armstrong. I think the move by him is just, maybe it's a hot take, I just think it's way too aggressive. My thing with offer sheets is that if you're going to offer sheet a player, make sure the guy you're getting is going to be a difference maker for your organization. Can you move the needle? Can he take you from being an average team to an above average team? Like, Marc Bergevin doing it years ago at Sebastian Aho. I find he undercommitted with the salary. I think it could have been higher, but that's the kind of guy you should target. Not a guy like Broberg, who's just shown flashes in the playoffs, playing sheltered minutes. So he was playing 15 minutes a night in the playoffs, about 13 a night in the regular season. Wasn't a pillar on that blue line by any accounts here. Holloway is a player that did show some is showing some promise as a player that could. Right now, he's on track to maybe being a top 9 forward. We don't know if he's got top 6 potential yet. And if you look, he's got 5 goals in the playoffs. Look, I'll break down his playoff numbers. In that game where they scored about 8, they won 8-4 in Florida. That is the game where he got most of those points. So for the rest of the playoffs, you can't really say that this guy was a difference maker. But the 2.2, or 2.3 AV offered to him kind of reflects that. For Broberg, I think the 4.5 is really high for a guy that hasn't really shown that he could do that. Let's say not even on a year basis. So it's aggressive by GM Doug Armstrong, and I don't like it because, yes, the compensation is a second and third round pick. So you're thinking, well, for 2 young players, that's not much to give away, but you're also killing the relationship you have with a team like Edmonton, and we know that in this league, with the salary cap as a big foundation for how decisions are made. And, you always need a team to take on salary for you or to dump salary towards another team in exchange for some sort of compensation. Those kind of moves cannot happen between those 2 organizations anymore. And if St. Louis in a couple of years is in a situation where they're cap strapped and they need to make a deal with Edmonton, do you think Edmonton is going to be willing to make a deal with them? I think absolutely not. So it's way too aggressive by them, and I don't even think the players that they're getting could even leave a mark on their roster right now. I think it's still to be seen, but they're young players that I think have shown some flashes, and I think that's why the Blues are targeting them.
Well, I would say I like this for both teams. And in terms of St. Louis's standpoint, I think the St. Louis Blues continue to buy low on young players. They did it with Buchnevich, and now they do it with Broberg.
Is it really buying low though? I mean, they didn't really buy low.
They're paying them for what they're gonna accomplish, not for what they've done already.
But it's not guaranteed. Broberg is he hasn't had a top 4 role ever. You're paying him like a number 4 or even a number 3 defenseman on some rosters. There's a lot to be expected there, and it's not like this guy is It's not like he's going into his second year in the league here. Yes, he has limited experience, but he hasn't showed that he's got it yet. That I think that's the point I was trying
Yeah,
to make.
Yeah, and I totally agree. Like he's only shown that he was a capable defenseman in the playoffs, which is why they let go of Vinny Desharnais, who signed with Vancouver, because it seemed that Broberg was going to take his spot. And then the offer sheet happens, and we're like, okay, so I guess he's not going to take that spot. They trade Cody Ceci, and we're like, okay, so it looks like they really want to keep Broberg, and they get Ty Emberson, who is a very underrated defenseman, and he did very well. Considering how poorly San Jose played, and especially being a defenseman and being successful at it on a bad hockey team, I can't imagine how well he's gonna do on a good hockey team. And he has connections with Chris Snowblock, which is why I think they targeted him specifically. But he's also 23 years old, so I'm like, okay, maybe they're trying to reshape their decor and try to get a little bit younger. So they're gonna have Broberg and Emberson, play together, and that was not the case. They didn't offer sheet. They didn't match the offer sheet for Broberg, and I think they just said, you know what, St. Louis really wants to pay him all this money. We know that we have to get Draisaitl signed to a long-term contract, and we need to, save as much cap space as possible in order to get that long-term deal done. So they saw that it was not worth it. And in terms of Holloway, they just replaced him with Podkolzin, but Podkolzin, again, he's not really a proven NHLer. He's been bouncing from the AHL to NHL, and he was, one of Vancouver's top prospects as well. And now they're going to be taking a chance on him essentially. But
but
I do believe that, you know, because of how deep Edmonton's forward group is, I don't really see Holloway as a major loss. But in terms of Broberg, I am aware that he's not the flashiest defenseman. He still has a lot to prove, but they're so thin at that position that I'm actually somewhat disappointed that they didn't give him a chance. But I am aware that Broberg did request to be traded on multiple occasions, which is why I'm not surprised he took the
for sure.
offer sheet, because I don't think there was really any value in terms of this player beforehand, or else Edmonton would have traded him. So I think this is his
Yeah,
only way out.
but
I
I
think what's
think the other,
worse is that Cody Ceci is basically got exchanged for nothing in this situation. You
yeah,
think after trading Cody Ceci, you think, well, now they're going to be able to bring back Broberg, but they're losing both players, and they're really for like pennies on the dollar. And
but
Cody
let me,
Ceci, he's somebody who's been criticized in the past for not really taking his game to the next level. Struggled a bit in Ottawa, didn't live up to expectations, and then kind of bounced around until he found the home in Edmonton. But until last season, where he was able to work with Paul Coffey and really like get inspired and elevate his game to a certain degree, where he was playing respectable second pairing minutes and thriving in that role last season. A guy like that, who was a pillar on a team that almost won the Stanley Cup, had to be traded for nothing for, and then you don't even bring back the guy that you were it looked like your intention to move all that salary cap space around for. So it's confusing on that perspective. And Chris, I absolutely agree that right now, speaking, Edmonton's decor is really lackluster. It could be considered very lackluster, and they don't
but
have the cap space either.
it's one of those things too that, like, look, I look at it more this way, and this is why I'm not sure if I agree with the Edmonton defense being lackluster, because yeah, okay, they traded Cody Ceci, and he's a veteran defenseman, and I think he played better in Edmonton compared to the other places he's been. But even still, like, Ty Emberson is a young defenseman. He played 30 games for the Sharks last year. He had 10 points. He was solid in the minutes that he did play. So replacing Cody Ceci and essentially Philip Broberg with a 24-year-old defenseman is not bad, especially a guy who's making a little bit more than league minimum. I think you could do a lot worse, right? And then the other argument is with Vasily Podkolzin, like you mentioned before. Yeah, he hasn't been the flashiest player. Yeah, he hasn't always lived up to the expectation that he was going to be as the 10th overall pick. But this is a guy that you can argue is pretty identical in terms of where he is with Holloway right now, right? Like, Holloway, spent some time in the AHL, played in the NHL. Maybe Holloway's played a little bit more games than Podkolzin, but ultimately, at the end of the day, both guys are kind of in the same situation. We're struggling on, teams that they were on previously. And they needed to change the scenery. And I think for both Holloway and Podkolzin, I think they're going to benefit from these changes of sceneries. And who knows, they might turn into, in Holloway's case, a top 9 forward, maybe even in Podkolzin's case, a top 9 forward. And I think it'll be okay. So I think for the Oilers, making those complementary moves, what essentially it does for them is kind of what I mentioned before, which is they lose out a little bit on their decor because replacing Cody Ceci and Philip Broberg with Ty Emberson is definitely not an upgrade. But it's one of those things that they're looking at it more from a situation of, if we would have matched Broberg, we would have been committing $4.5 million to a guy who A, doesn't want to be here, and B, hasn't proven enough to be worth that contract, right? And at the end of the day, you could turn around and say, oh, well, why did they trade Cody Ceci? Well, it's because they needed to move cap space anyways, and the most likely guy that was going to be able to be moved was Cody Ceci. So realistically speaking, it's not as big of a deal for the Oilers if you look at it. And the other thing too is, they're going to be going into the season with, $5 million in cap space because Evander Kane's likely going to be thrown on LTIR. So they're going to have LTIR cap space that they're going to be able to work with. And they're already under the cap right now. And if you look at their roster, I mean, they have 6 defensemen that are able to play. Like, it's not the end of the world. I know it's not the most elite thing in the world, but at least it allows them to, be able to use that LTIR space if they need to at some point to be able to go out and do something with it later on.
Okay.
Yeah, well, that the LTIR is a good argument, but we don't know the future of Evander Kane and if he's going to be ready for the start of the season. We don't know what's going on his front.
No, but
Look,
the rumor is that he's likely going to miss the beginning of training camp and he's going to be put on LTIR.
Yeah, what I think another factor that goes into this is that they didn't want to have to be dealt with a problem midway through the season where we're like, oh boy, we have to trade somebody now just to clear up some cap space, just to add Kane back to the roster. They want to head into the season with some leverage. So when he comes back, they could just, slot him in perfectly. They're not going to have to make that extra move. And you know how NHL teams are in this league where, when a team is really desperate, they'll take advantage of you and they'll try to, essentially fleece you. And knowing that, they could have potentially been in a spot where, they need to move at least 1 or 2 players, they could have, a team could have ended up with a very solid player for very cheap. So I think they wanted to avoid that. And I think also, Jackson and Bowman been working together as president and GM. I think they've done a great job, throughout this offer sheet saga, but also, Jackson throughout the whole off season, I think being, a GM for the months where they didn't have a GM because Ken Holland stepped away. Or was just not offered an extension. I think he did a fantastic job at Edmonton, and I think this doesn't really hurt Edmonton, just based off what they've accomplished throughout the whole offseason. And I think Ty Emberson is a upgrade on Cody Ceci. Playing on San Jose being only a -4, whereas Cody Ceci playing on the Edmonton Oilers being a -5, and there was only a 9-point difference, and he's 6 years younger. I think they did a great job, and the fact that they didn't have to retain any salary on Cody Ceci, I think that's great. The problem is now you have Brett Kulak in your top 4, and we've seen Brett Kulak play top 4 minutes for the Montreal Canadiens, and that was not great. He's a third pairing defenseman at most, so I'm really not crazy about this decor, especially how Darnell Nurse has been lately, and what how poor he played during the playoffs. Will he bounce back? Will he live up to that contract? Who knows? I think, as of right now, their defense is their weakest, position. And it's not like they improved their goaltending situation either. Stuart Skinner is very inconsistent. So this is a team that's prioritizing offense over a defensive structure, which they've been doing for so many years. And surprisingly, they made it to the finals. Just buying into that philosophy, but I'm really not crazy about their decor at all at this point in time.
Well, they're reliant on one top pairing, which has been fantastic for them all throughout the regular season and playoffs. Matthias Ekholm, Evan Bouchard, and they're putting a lot of weight on for these guys to step up again. And when you have a guy like Brett Kulak on your second pairing, you're not going to want to expect too much out of him either. And that kind of jumps up the minutes for a guy like Darnell Nurse, Ekholm, and Bouchard. So you're putting even more of a strain on them. Josh Brown is a fringe NHLer. They don't have that much in the system. And Ty Eberson is a wait and see. Yes, he had the 10 points in 30 games and a team with no expectations and where he didn't really play a role with too much responsibility either. But I think another thing with going back to Broberg is that so he accepts the offer sheet for 4.5. You can't hate on the player for getting his money, right? NHL careers are short. Anytime they can maximize value with their contracts, they're gonna do that because those your career could be 7 years, 10 years, 5 years, and it could be really all fluctuated due to injuries. So you can't hate the guy for doing that. But him signing the offer sheet now what it shows me is that right away you knew he wasn't serious about staying in Edmonton because you can't be that you can't not know what's going on with the team's salary cap situation. You know how they're allocating their budget, and you see guys like Adam Henrique who decided to come back and take a crazy discount to come back to Edmonton and really help out the team from a salary cap perspective. And he decided, no, I'm not going to be adopting that philosophy to help the team remain, competitive and just bring all the guys back that they went on a big playoff run with. So his intentions, I think, from the beginning were always to go to St. Louis and basically kind of expecting that Edmonton was never going to match that contract.
And I would also like to mention that the Edmonton Oilers did not have a surplus of picks before not choosing not to match these offer sheets. They receive a second and a third, and and they recently traded a third and a fourth. So just taking a look at the 2025 picks, they only have a second, a third, a sixth, and a seventh. So they're very, very thin in terms of picks, and this is a team that's going to be very competitive throughout the whole year and heading into the deadline. If you don't have assets, then if you really need to add like a top defenseman, which I would assume that would be their goal because the defensive core is so thin right now. They're gonna have to accumulate a couple of assets in order to get that done, and also putting Kane on LTIR would open up some cap space, so they could potentially maybe go get that defenseman if they choose to. But in terms of the St. Louis Blues, I was just showing a couple of quotes from Holloway and Broberg before. They both wanted to join a St. Louis Blue team where they knew they had a fair shot, and where it's a very young environment. Which I don't blame them because I don't think they would have really panned out if they would have stayed in Edmonton. Holloway, I'm sorry, is not a top six forward in Edmonton, and I don't think he would be ever if he decided to stay there. At least with St. Louis, he's projected to be in the top six, playing on the second line. And in terms of Broberg, as of right now, he's going to be a third pairing defenseman. But if he really shows that he's capable of becoming the defenseman that he was drafted to be, I don't I wouldn't be surprised if a guy like Nick Leddy or Perico are moved at one point in time if St. Louis fails to make the playoffs once again, and Broberg is able to jump back into it. And another thing as well to mention is that Torrey Krug is injured currently, and he's probably going to be out for the rest of the season or the whole season. Sorry. So this also gives an opportunity for Broberg to really show what he's capable of, whereas he would be playing behind Ekholm, Bouchard, and Nurse in Edmonton. So I think they just have a better path for them. I think they just chose their careers over their team's success, and they want to make a name for themselves. And like you mentioned, Zach, like you could get injured at any time, and sometimes you just want to take the money over taking a discount. And Luca mentioned that you would value these guys at around $1 to $2 million. It was mentioned that Broberg was offered 2 years at 1.1.
There you go.
And there was also other teams that were willing to offer sheet Broberg. So there was a very hot market for Broberg, and I'm pretty sure for Holloway it was just St. Louis. But there was something that teams saw in Broberg, probably based off his playoff performance, and that's why they wanted to add him. Another thing to add as well is Zach mentioned that this could affect his relationship with Edmonton or the rest of the league. Well, this trade right after the offer sheet shows that I don't think there's any hard feelings because Edmonton was compensated further by receiving a third round pick in 2028 and a prospect in Paul Fischer, and they gave up nothing. So um, I think there's still a relationship there. If this trade didn't happen, then I would say I agree with you that there is a broken relationship between the two.
Yeah, I agree.
Fair
And
enough.
do you guys have anything else to add in terms of like what expectations are for Broberg and Holloway joining the St. Louis Blues? Like,
I
what do you
mean,
expect them?
the expectation is that they have to live up to the contracts they were given. I mean, you paid Broberg $4.5 million. You better hope he plays like a $4.5 million defenseman. So that's how I see it. I mean, at the end of the day, you expect them to obviously be worth the contracts you paid them, and hopefully they'll pan out. I mean, I think Holloway has a better chance of hitting that contract. Broberg, I'm not sure.
And these were both Ken Holland draft picks. So once again, showing that Ken Holland, really failed in terms of his scouting and drafting while he was the GM of the Edmonton Oilers. So
I don't.
drafted in the first round, 14 overall in 2020, Holloway, and Philip Broberg being an eighth overall pick in 2019. So the Ken Holland era, still somewhat leaves a stain on the organization and its fan base. So I think that's pretty much it, guys, in terms of our coverage of the offer sheet saga and the trades that happened in between. We'd like to hear your thoughts, guys. Edmonton Oiler fans, what are you guys thinking? Are you guys happy that both offers were not matched and the trades that you guys made in terms of clearing up cap space, receiving assets, and adding Ty Emberson and Vasily Prigozhin? And St. Louis fans, how you guys feeling adding Broberg and Holloway to your team, and what are your expectations for such a young core heading into the season? Guys, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Young Guns Podcast. Thank you so much, guys, for watching.